Hello and welcome to Sunset Television. I'm Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our special show Reset India, where we talk about those sectors which are really important in India's journey from here onwards towards the future, and what exactly is being done on the ground to give a push to those sectors and ultimately to the Indian economy out here. Today we're going to talk about the electric mobility segment. Now, India's commitment to electric mobility segment is pretty much clear, and this has gone a bit too few notches up in the recent past, and there are certain reasons behind that, specifically the demand creation, also the domestic manufacturing front, and obviously the state policies, the policies which have been put in place by both the central government and various state governments as well. So we'll talk about all those aspects today, and we'll be joined by two experts as well. But before we move ahead, let us take you through some of the important initiatives of the government or some policy tweaks which the government has made in the recent past to ensure a push to the electric mobility segment. And the first is multiple interventions have been made to support demand creation in the market. Very, very important. Now, the GST on EVs has been reduced from 12% to 5%. Again, focused towards creating demand. Now, GST on chargers, charging stations reduced from 18% to 5%. A bit of a push to the industry there. EVs permit requirements have been exempted. That is, electric vehicles not require permits. Also, the states have reduced or waived road taxes for electric vehicles, and there are several state governments which have come out with those guidelines. Model building bylaws 2016 has been amended, and this is really significant. This takes into care configuration the aspect of not only putting electric vehicles out there, but also the charging stations. The charging infrastructure is a really important aspect there, and therein we're talking about the bylaws to establish charging stations in private and commercial buildings. Sale of electricity as service for charging of EVs is allowed. This is going to help those people who will go ahead and have a lot of electric vehicles for commercial purpose and can also use their charging infrastructure to go ahead and give a boost to their income. Now, huge incentive to attract investments into charging infrastructure. Additional IT deduction on interest paid on loans during budget year 2019-20. So these are some of the points out there which the government has gone ahead and taken care of in terms of the policy tweaks. We'll talk about all of them. We'll also talk about what exactly the situation in the market is, and specifically with respect to both the demand creation and domestic manufacturing as well. So let me introduce our guests here. Two experts who we have with us today, Mr. Abhishek Saxena, public policy expert from NITI Aayog, and Mr. Ankit Kumar, the CEO of GoZero Mobility, is also joining us. Welcome, both of you gentlemen, to Sunset Television. Let me begin with you, Mr. Saxena. I listed some of the steps which have been taken by government, and not only the central government, but also some state governments as well. If you could take us through to the present day scenario vis-a-vis electric mobility in India, and also, summarize these steps and how these are going to help in the near future.
Right. Thank you for this question, and I would like to congratulate TV for having such a timely discussion on electric mobility. See, when we are trying to recover from a post-COVID world, and the whole world is looking for green recovery and sustainable growth, electric mobility in that aspect plays a huge role in that. We have seen this across the world, even in countries like United States, France, Germany, Japan, all over the world. The recovery in the post-COVID world is being driven on the idea of electric mobility. And since electric mobility, has zero emissions in itself, this will help us curb our emissions, which will help India particularly in meeting its INDC targets of the Paris Pact. Along with that, India has multiple benefits to reap out of this electric vehicle journey. So the first benefit is India has somewhere around 14 to 15 most polluted cities of the world, which is one of the highest any country has. Electric vehicles, and transportation in particular constitute a high proportion of the pollution, of the total pollution. So electric vehicle is going to reduce that drastically.
Okay.
Secondly, we have a huge import bill, which is close to 100 billion USD per year. Now we are dependent for 80 to 85% of our crude from the imports. Electric vehicle can be powered by solar, which is can be generated by renewable. And I can elaborate more on how India has become a pioneer in the solar, where the prices have come down to less than rupees 1.99 per kilowatt hour. That is amazing. So with this context, I think India is in the saddle, I can say that, for electric mobility. And along with the world, it is taking a very huge lead in that. Secondly, you've mentioned about some of the key steps that government of India has taken. Let me just elaborate on a couple of the points. See, the idea is electric mobility is a viable option for any transportation medium that is established across the world in academia and in public discourses also. But there's a slight cost differential in the prices of, let's say, petrol and diesel vehicles versus an electric.
Okay.
So with a lot of initiatives, we have rolled out FAME 2 scheme, which is a 10,000 crore direct benefit incentive to the customers who are buying electric vehicles. So that has given a huge push to it. You mentioned a very interesting point about GST reduction from 12 to 5%. Now, if you look at the GST reduction and GST of electric vehicle and compare it with ICE, which is at 28%, and the GST for electric vehicle is at 5%. So there's a 23% differential in the price in the GST for electric vehicle versus an ICE vehicle.
Okay.
That is in itself a huge benefit. Along with that, we've seen a huge proliferation of electric rickshaws in India. There are some 20 lakh electric rickshaws already running on the road. And that has come up due to one point, which is the waiver of the permit requirement. Along with that, income tax benefits, we have reduced registration fees to zero. So these are the bouquet of incentives and the bouquet of, nudges that we are trying to give to customers to move towards electric vehicle as a whole. So this is the framework that we are trying to build. And I must say that a lot of states have also done a good work, in coming out with incentives, in coming out with a support mechanism for electric vehicles to take it in the top gear.
Okay. That's quite an elaborate framework and mechanism out there. But let's also hear the industry's viewpoint. Mr. Kumar is here with us. Mr. Ankit Kumar, the CEO of GoZero Mobility. Mr. Kumar, I'm sure you would like to elaborate on the or rather add on to the larger goals as far as the push on the electric mobility is concerned. But let's first focus on the very, very important aspect here, which emanates from those policies or the bouquet of incentives which Mr. Saxena was pointing out, which even I pointed out in the beginning of the show. How is the situation vis-a-vis demand as far as the industry is concerned? Because any industry will thrive and survive only if there is a regular demand creation there. Now, the government's policy, the bouquet of incentives, is trying to go ahead and give a push on that side. What's the actual ground situation there?
Sure. Thank you, Vishal, first of all, for having me on the show. I have been hearing Abhishek talking about the policies, etc. I must say, I really advocate and I really say that the kind of policies and the kind of initiatives that the government of India, NITI Aayog, has been taking is phenomenal. You won't find anything like this sort anywhere in the world today. The push that our Prime Minister has been leading from the front has been phenomenal and has been helping the industry at large. Now, when you dissect the entire industry altogether, you talk about heavy vehicles, you talk about e-buses, you talk about e-trucks, you talk about the automobile, the car industry, then you talk about the two-wheelers and you talk about electric bicycles. Now, electric bicycle is a category where we fall in. We make electric bicycles and those sales have been thriving post the lockdown period, not just because of being electric, but also because of people have adapted and they have realized the value of health altogether. They want a mix of both things. They want to be eco-friendly, they want to be fit, and they want to ride something which is more sustainable and more eco-friendly at the end of the day. They're choosing to go with e-bicycles. And I personally believe that the future of EVs, and if we have to make sure that the EVs are there and on the road 30% onto the road, let's say by 2030, if that is a target, we need to focus more and more on two-wheelers. We need to focus more on e-bikes, e-scooters, e-motorcycles, because those are a large chunk of sales that today happens in India. 21 million two-wheelers are sold in India. If you are able to convert that to a larger chunk of that to electric vehicles, people will start seeing that adaptability will automatically come, slowly and gradually. If you ask me today, my interactions with some of the two-wheeler manufacturers, what has happened so far, I personally see that tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities have got higher adaptability of electric vehicles than talking about metropolitan cities. I mean, I'm talking about cities like Delhi, which we have got to have like 10,000 chargers by the end of this year. Even with this, the kind of adaptability that people have in metropolitan is nowhere compared to what people have in tier 1 or capital cities, or going to all different tier 2 cities as well. So demand is certainly there. The kind of products that will enhance those demands needs to come out. People are trying to come out with those things, and I see that one of the challenges which has been into the industry is skill development. And I completely advocate that, because skill development, if we have to become a EV leader in the world today, we have to train people to start manufacturing battery packs, to start manufacturing rather than assembly motors. So no assembly work. Start manufacturing those components locally out here. And those things needs to be promoted. So PMP is a step towards that. But how effective the execution is going to be is something which is dependent on the industry. And how can you make sure that the skill development activities can be all taken up is something which is dependent on all of us to make sure. So yeah, government is creating really, really good policies altogether. But how it is going to be effectively utilized is something that we need to all wait and see.
Okay, definitely. It is for the industry to go ahead and make use of that. But two very important points which have been made by, Mr. Kumar here, and I'd like to bring Mr. Saxena on those 2 points. One is the focus on domestic manufacturing. As Mr. Kumar is pointing out, the idea is if we develop the skills and if we manufacture it indigenously, then obviously we will have that, leverage as far as the push for electric mobility is concerned. Second aspect, which Mr. Kumar is, pointing out, Mr. Saxena, and I'd like to seek your opinion as well on that, is that we need to focus first on two-wheelers because perhaps one of the reason, if you could put it in a much better perspective, Mr. Saxena, is the range anxiety as well when we're talking about the four-wheelers?
Right. No, very, very important points made by Mr. Kumar, and I'll touch upon both these points. See, the first idea is regarding the domestic manufacturing, and very rightly said by Mr. Kumar. See, you look at the overall picture. India's automobile industry is one of the best in the world, and there is no doubt. And the prowess it has across the world is being acknowledged by every automobile manufacturer of the world. So, just to give you some facts around that, India is the largest manufacturer of two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and tractors. It is the fourth largest manufacturer of four-wheelers and the second largest manufacturer of buses. Along with that, the automobile sector as a whole contributes to 3 crore jobs directly and indirectly, and contributes around 7% of the GDP. So that's a huge, massive industry that we are talking about at this point of time. Now, when we are transitioning to electric vehicle, we want to transition to the electric vehicle, but we also want to transition with a backbone of Make in India. We want to have that indigenous production in-house. We can't be the importers of electric vehicles from outside. What it will do is it will shift jobs out of India, and the large population which is already dependent on the traditional IC automobiles would be out of jobs. So the idea is to create those jobs in India, create additional jobs, and drive electric mobility on the backbone of indigenous manufacturing. So that is the idea that we should be more focused upon. The environmental benefits combined with the industrial policy that we need to use for electric vehicle is a must according to me. So that is regarding the first point on the manufacturing aspect of it. Regarding the second point on two-wheelers, I think I think it is very right, and that has been reflected in all our policy decisions also. So two-wheelers along with the public transport has been the core focus of Government of India and NITI Aayog in multiple policy decisions. So India's automobile landscape or India's vehicular landscape is very different from a Western country. You have 80% of your total sales as two-wheelers. Somewhere 78 to 80% is the number that we are talking about.
Okay.
More than 30 to 40% of people are actually traveling by two-wheelers. So the idea is that the two-wheelers are the lowest hanging fruits. They are the most preferred mode of transport by people in India, and they are not technologically, let me put it this way, a complex automobile to manufacture in India.
Okay.
Vis-a-vis compared to, let's say, an electric car, which has a lot of power electronics, which has a lot of telematics involved in it. So electric two-wheeler is a simple device to be manufactured, and the technology is already available in India. So with this kind of intervention, and one more point that Mr. Kumar actually mentioned about electric cycles, I think it is very important to look at India from the perspective of cycling. We are selling somewhere around 2 crore cycles every year, and a large part of it could be electric. And we could be the export powerhouse of the world for electric cycles, because the demand for electric cycles has actually skyrocketed in the COVID and the post-COVID situation. So these are the couple of points I wanted to bring about, and two-wheeler and the smaller mobility forms of electric cycle is the way forward for India.
Okay, fair enough. The two-wheeler segment seemingly is obviously the lowest hanging fruit there. And one question I'd like to put to you, Mr. Kumar, obviously that doesn't concern the product which you're making, because it's just it's electric bicycle which you're into manufacturing of. That's the range anxiety part. And the reason why I want to understand your perspective, since you're associated with the industry, is we can't simply let go of the four-wheeler segment as well. So if we have to focus on the four-wheeler segment, and if we have to address the consumer's concern vis-a-vis the range anxiety part, how do you believe we need to move further ahead on that part also? It might take a bit longer, and we might have to travel a bit more difficult path there, but how?
See, it's always have been that any new technology that comes is always expensive than a conventional technology. So when you talk about electric vehicles today and you want a good product into the electric vehicle category, it is going to be expensive. When you try to cut that down and bring it to a mass and make it more affordable in means, you're cutting down on multiple things as such. So, look at, for examples, what is the range that a particular car in India gives. Compared to what Tesla gives, but look at the prices also. Look at the price difference also. So when you're building a product for a mass, it again needs to realize at some point of time, and those costs needs to be completely taken into picture. Now, charging infrastructure is one such thing where the technology is already super advanced. You have opportunity charging, you have flash charging, you have multiple ways of charging. But how effective and how can you put that on road? And the question always remains that when you don't have enough cars, why do you put up these charging stations, which are costing you 50 lakh, 60 lakh, just one charging stations to put up? So the question comes that, demand for cars will be there. You have seen that when Tata released their Nexon, it started selling good, and the numbers really pumped up compared to what E2O was doing or compared to what E-Verito was doing. Now, people wanted the experience. And I see, cities like Dehradun, cities like Mussoorie, those are cities which have adopted even Hyundai Kona, which you see in huge numbers in those cities. People are driving those cars. One of the reasons is range is pretty good in Kona, but again, how many people can afford that car? Definitely. It's priced at 24, 25 odd lakhs. Now, when you're developing a car for the mass segment, it is very imperative that either you keep it as a city car, that you commute within the city limits. It's not an off-drive car. You can't go for off-driving to multiple other cities. Else, you create highways, which I guess NHEV and few other initiative takers are trying to do, creating Delhi Jaipur as a e-highway and creating Delhi Agra as a e-highway corridor sort of thing, where you have ample of charging stations kept at different intervals, where
Okay.
people can stop their cars, charge, take a 5-10 minutes break, and then keep on going. Now, that's how the infrastructure is going to develop even in the future. That's how things are going to make much more sense for EVs and especially cars to flourish. But today, cars have a limitation to the city limits only. And that's how it needs to sell.
Okay, definitely. That is a really important perspective there. We will have to obviously think of the masses, the consumer segment, but also the infrastructure, which point which Mr. Kumar mentioned. I'd like to bring you in here for a concluding comment, Mr. Saxena, and that's on the infrastructure part, because obviously there has to be a complete ecosystem which needs to be put in place. And when we're talking about the larger vehicles, the segment, the four-wheeler segment, this entire infrastructure is really important and significant. How are we moving ahead on that? There are some policies which, as I mentioned earlier, which do, go on a long way in putting those things in place. But how long do you think will take to go ahead and put those essentials in place?
Right. That is a very important point, and a very pertinent question that comes up again and again around the charging infrastructure and the corresponding range anxiety that people have regarding electric vehicles. Let me slightly dig deep into this. See, charging infrastructure for electric vehicles is not a very similar comparison to a petrol pump. It is a cultural shift that we are, kind of envisaging at this point of time. The electric vehicle charging is going to be very different from your visit to a petrol pump. So, you have a very specific task at hand, that you go and visit a petrol pump, get your fuel tanks refill and come back. Electric vehicle charging is not going to be that way. It's going to be very, kind of intertwined with your daily lives. You can have charging at your home. You can have charging at your workplaces. You can have charging at your shopping stations. You can have charging at the marketplaces. So it's going to be whole distributed. Now, having said that, see, the charging requirements for India, and as I've already talked about, the vehicular mix that India has, so where it is dominated 80% by two-wheelers, is going to be very different from the charging infrastructure requirements of the West, which is heavily car dependent, and you don't see two-wheelers and three-wheelers and the kind of diversity that India has. So the charging infrastructure in the traditional sense, and if I'm looking at the Western countries of, let's say, US and Europe, cannot be replicated in India. Secondly, there are a lot of different models which are actually coming up in India. So if I'm talking about models like battery swapping, and I think your viewers will agree with this point, that we have all seen electric rickshaws on the road, and we've seen a huge proliferation of them. But we have not seen a huge proliferation of electric chargers. So where are they charging from? So they are getting charged from a model called battery swapping, which might be formal or which might be informal in that sense. So a lot of different kind of, infrastructural mix and different kind of models for charging would actually emerge in India.
Definitely.
And that is what we envisage at this point of time. So it is not as homogeneous as in Western countries, where the mobility is driven by cars. We'll have different charging requirements for, let's say a city bus. We'll have different requirements for a two-wheeler and a three-wheeler, and a different requirement for a four-wheeler. And we see a mix of them evolving. With that, we have also taken, and I think Ministry of Power has taken a lot of proactive steps in that. We have rolled out somewhere around 2,600 charging stations across 64 cities. We have rolled out some 1,500 charging stations along different highways, and a lot of different agencies are actually trying to set up, along with the oil marketing companies, private investment.
There are several models which are being explored.
So this will be a huge mix, and we are kind of, in the scenario of taking it hand by hand. It's not as if, you set up a charging infrastructure and then you wait for the electric vehicles to come. We are kind of trying to gel up these both up and trying to ramp up those simultaneously is the model
Okay.
that we are thinking on.
Okay, definitely. That is pretty much true. The ball has been set rolling, and we're obviously looking for solutions based on our needs and our, system requirements and the availability of solutions which we can find here. Thank you so much, Mr. Saxena, as well as Mr. Ankit Kumar, for your views and your insights. It was indeed a wonderful analysis of the push for electric mobility in India, and as the experts were pointing out, there clearly the time has come for the electric vehicles. A lot is being done on the ground, both in terms of policies, not only to create demand, but also to enable the industry and both the consumers to take benefit of this particular initiative. So let's wait and watch as to how this entire sector moves ahead, and we'll keep you updated on all the developments there. Keep watching Sunset Television. Thank you.